Everyone, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn presented by ARP Compliance OMB. We're going to hit the record button now, so this will be available on the grantee resources page at a later date. I do have a cough drop in, so I don't descend into a coughing fit, so please bear with me. I'm getting over the flu. Today is our Introduction to Federal Grant Compliance, Part 3. Let's get into it. The purpose of Part 3 today, we're going to continue our deep dive into the 2 CFR 200 Subpart D. We're also going to review the Subpart E cost principles and Subpart F audit requirements. And we're going to review common compliance findings related to policies and procedures and identify strategies to remain compliant. I'm going to do the first half of today, and Lucy Evans will be doing the back half. Subpart D, procurement requirements. Procurement requirements, 200.318 General Procurement Standards. Recipients and subrecipients must have and use documented procurement procedures consistent with the 2 CFR 200, state and local laws and regulations. Recipients and subrecipients must maintain oversight to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms, conditions, and specifications of their contracts or purchase orders. Let's see. Procurement requirements, general procurement standards continued. Recipients and subrecipients must maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest and governing the actions of its employees engaged in the selection, award, and administration of contracts. No employee, officer, or agent may participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by a federal award if he or she has a real or apparent conflict of interest. Such a conflict of interest would arise when the employee, officer, or agent, any member of his or her immediate family, his or her partner, or an organization which employs or is about to employ any of the parties indicated herein has a financial or other interest in or a tangible personal benefit from a firm considered for a contract. The officers, employees, and agents of the non-federal entity may neither solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors or parties to subcontracts. However, non-federal entities may set standards for situations in which the financial interest is not substantial or the gift is an unsolicited item of nominal value. The standards of conduct must provide for disciplinary actions to be applied for violations of such standards by officers, employees, or agents of the non-federal entity. Okay, first question. Our organization needs to contract with a company to provide IT support to us. The lowest bidder is a company owned by the brother of Sally Jones, our director of development. If we contract with this company, will that be a conflict of interest? Choice A, yes. The 2 CFR 200 specifically prohibits awarding contracts to siblings of employees. B, yes. If Sally helped develop the bid criteria or was one of the bid reviewers. Or C, yes. If Sally helped develop the bid criteria, was one of the bid reviewers, or will administer the contract. Please drop your answers in the chat. Seeing a lot of A's. Seeing a few C's. Looks like the house is divided. So The correct answer is actually C. Now, this is kind of a trick question. Although C is the answer, there's still an appearance of conflict of interest that should be avoided. If I were the head of this organization, I would award the contract to a different company, not the brothers company. Okay, let's move on here. All right, all procurement transactions for the acquisition of property or services required under a federal award must be conducted in a manner providing full and open competition. Recipients or subrecipients must not place unreasonable requirements on firms in order for them to qualify to do business, require unnecessary experience and excessive bonding, use non-competitive contracts to consultants that are on retainer contracts, engage in conflict of interest, specify only a brand name instead of an equal product, use any arbitrary action in the procurement process. Recipients and subrecipients must conduct procurements in a manner that prohibits the use of statutorily or administratively imposed state or local geographical preferences in the evaluation of bids or proposals, except in cases where the applicable federal statutes mandate or encourage doing so. There's an exception for architectural and engineering services. Let's talk about micro purchases. These are purchases of like goods and services in aggregate of $10,000 or less in a single fiscal year. The 2 CFR 200 allows recipients and subrecipients that meet certain criteria to raise the threshold as high as $50,000. No formal competition is needed, i.e., no price or rate quotes are needed. All costs must be reasonable. Costs should be spread equitably among qualified suppliers. Small purchases. For Louisville Metro government, purchases between $10,000 aggregate and $40,000. For grantees that are not local governments, purchases between $10,000 aggregate and the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently $250,000. Recipients and subrecipients must obtain price or rate quotations from an adequate number of qualified sources as determined appropriate by the entity. LMG agencies must obtain at least 3 quotes. Adequate number cannot be 1 quote. Formal procurement methods. For Louisville Metro, purchases above $40,000. For grantees that are not local governments, above $250,000. So there's some specific methods here. There's sealed bids, a procurement method in which bids are publicly solicited and firm fixed price contract is awarded to the responsible bidder whose bid, conforming with all the material terms and conditions of the invitation for bids, is the lowest in price. Sealed bids method is preferred for procuring construction. Or proposals, aka request for proposals, RFP, a procurement method in which either a fixed price or cost reimbursement type contract is awarded. Proposals are generally used when conditions are not appropriate for the use of the sealed bids. Non-competitive procurement allowed only in specific circumstances. Purchases that meet the micro-purchase requirements. The item is available only from a single source. During public exigency or emergency, i.e. a declared emergency, federal agency provides written authorization to forego competition. After solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined inadequate. So Subpart D also contains a number of other procurement requirements, including requirements for contracting with small and minority businesses, women's businesses enterprises, and labor surplus area firms, domestic preferences for procurement, procurement of recovered materials, contract cost and price requirements, federal awarding agency or pass-through entity review, bonding requirements, contract provisions. See also Appendix 2. So quiz time. So this is actually not a multiple choice. You're just going to need to type the answer in the chat. Purchases of like goods and services up to $10,000 aggregate per fiscal year are called what? All right, great job, everyone. I'm seeing nothing but correct answers. The answer is micro purchases. Okay, another question. Through our federal grant program, we're going to construct a homeless shelter. The appropriate competition method will be A, RFP, request for proposals, B, sealed bids, or C, non-competitive procurement. Okay, I'm seeing a mix of answers between A and B. So the correct answer is actually B, sealed bids, and that's because it's construction. Okay. In which of the following scenarios is non-competitive procurement allowed? We need to purchase equipment to respond to a declared disaster. The equipment that we need is new technology only available from one supplier. No other equipment can meet our needs. B, we bid out the equipment purchase and only one supplier responded to our bid. We issued the bid a second time and again, only the single supplier responded. Or D, all of the above. All right, answers are trickling in. I'm seeing a lot of D, and that is the correct answer. It would be all of the above. Great job, everyone. All right, just a few more slides before I turn it over to Lucy. So we're going to talk about Subpart D, subrecipient monitoring and management requirements. Pass-through entities are organizations that receive federal funding and then grant part or all of that funding to subrecipient organizations. Title 2 CFR 200.331 through .333 contain the requirement pass-through entities must follow, 1, before granting the funds, and 2, throughout the life of the grant. The next few slides provide an overview of these requirements. However, please understand that subrecipient monitoring and management is detailed work that requires a great deal of time on the part of the pass-through entity. Pass-through entities that award federal funds to grantees must make a formal written determination that an entity is a contractor or subrecipient. So a subrecipient determines who is eligible to receive what federal assistance, has its performance measured in relation to whether objectives of a federal program were met, has responsibility for programmatic decision-making, is responsible for adherence to applicable federal program requirements specified in the federal award. In accordance with its agreement, uses the federal funds to carry out a program for a public purpose specified in authorizing statute, as opposed to providing goods or services for the benefit of the pass-through entity. Pass-through entities that award federal funds to grantees must make a formal written determination that an entity is a contractor or subrecipient. So contractors provide the goods and services within normal business operations, provide similar goods or services to many different purchasers, normally operates in a competitive environment, provides goods or services that are ancillary or secondary to the operation of the federal program. Contractors are not subject to compliance requirements of the federal program as a result of the agreement, though similar requirements may apply for other reasons. All right. Let's see here. We're going to let Lucy Evans take over now. Thank you all for listening to me.
Okay, we're going to get started with some questions. We're going to figure out, is the following a subrecipient or a contractor relationship? Okay, so a metro agency received $1 million in federal funding to increase learning among young children. The metro agency provides funds to ABC nonprofit to deliver early learning services to children ages 1 through 4. ABC nonprofit has provided early learning programming since 2008 and currently serves 200 young children. ABC nonprofit uses an application review process that ensures all students live within the Russell neighborhood. So put your answers in the chat. Is this a contractor or a subrecipient? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of answers for subrecipient, and that is correct. We would treat this as a subrecipient because Metro funds are being used to help bolster a program in a community that's already happening. And the ABC nonprofit is also managing the program, making sure that the students that are served are from a particular neighborhood. So we would consider them a subrecipient. Okay. Okay, next question. Is the following a subrecipient or a contractor relationship? Identify problems in early learning students might experience. ABC nonprofit engages diagnostic tests or DT are used to provide vision and hearing tests for all students. DTRU provides similar services to more than 500 schools, corporations, and other organizations. A list of their fees is available on DRTU's website. So is this a contractor or a subrecipient? I'm seeing a lot of answers as a contractor, and that is correct. The biggest reason I would say this is a contractor is it is providing just a part of a service that's necessary to the grant. It's not providing the whole programmatic background for the program. It's just confirming or it's just consulting on one part. Okay. Okay, so more on subrecipient monitoring and management. Pass-through entities that award federal funds to grantees must issue subawards, which we mostly know as grant agreements, that clearly identify to the subrecipient that the grant is a subaward of federal funds and must include certain required information in the grant agreements. You also the subrecipient must complete a risk assessment the pass-through entity must complete a risk assessment on each subrecipient, considering factors such as prior experience, results of previous audits, agency turnover, monitoring results, and other things along those lines. Pass-through entities that award federal funds to grantees must monitor the subrecipient activities. This includes monitoring of financial and performance reports, review of the subrecipient's single audit, and any other steps necessary to ensure that the subaward is used for authorized purposes and the subrecipient remains compliant and achieves their performance goals. Work with subrecipient to resolve audit findings on the funded program. And verify that every subrecipient is audited as required by Subpart F. Okay, now we are going to go over Subpart E, which is cost principles. Okay, cost principles are found in Subpart E of the Uniform Grant Guidance, which is titled 2 CFR 200. More specifically, Subpart E provides detailed information about many CAST categories and explains whether they are eligible, ineligible, eligible with restrictions, or eligible with prior federal approval. Cost principles also list in detail general cost principles, which are represented by the letters ARA, allowable, reasonable, and allocable. A cost is allowable if it is included in the approved budget in your grant agreement or in a subsequent budget amendment. It's justified as necessary and reasonable for the performance of the grant program. A cost is necessary if it meets an important program objective. And a cost is allowable if it is treated consistently as a direct or indirect cost across all grants. Allowable costs must not be charged to another grant or any other cost center. So this is something we've referred to in the past as double dipping. If you're charging hours to one grant program, you can't take those same hours and charge them to another grant program. Allowable costs must adhere to requirements and all applicable laws. They must comply with your policies and procedures that apply to all activities, regardless of the funding source, and they must be adequately documented. So now we're going to talk about reasonable costs. Reasonable costs have two required tests. The reasonableness required tests are the nature and the cost of the expense moderate and a sensible use of funds? This is something we've talked about in previous Lunch and Learns, the prudent person test. Would news coverage of a grant spending make your organization and Louisville Metro government look reasonable or irresponsible? This is what we've referred to as the evening news test. When assessing cost reasonableness, you must answer many questions related to each cost. Is the cost ordinary and necessary for the operation and efficient performance of the grant award? Did you act with integrity and prudence when incurring the cost, considering your responsibilities to the people you serve, the taxpayers, Louisville Metro government, and the federal government? You must also ask, does the cost significantly deviate from established practices and policies? And is the cost reasonably priced for the Louisville metro area? Okay, allocable costs. Costs that are allocated to a grant award must be allocated to the award to the extent they benefit that award, necessary to the grant program's overall operation, assignable to the federal award in accordance with the 2 CFR 200. Are they incurred specifically for the award? And are they distributed in portions that can be approximated and justified using reasonable methods? Okay, now we're going to talk about subpart F, which is audit requirements. Single audit requirements. Recipients and subrecipients expending $750,000 or more in federal funds in a fiscal year must undergo a single audit. Single audits are external audits typically performed by CPAs. Auditors review the grant program in accordance with the annual compliance supplement issued by Federal Office of Management and Budget. Auditors may issue findings for improper payments and other areas of non-compliance. Recipients and subrecipients must develop a corrective action plan, sometimes called a CAP, to respond to audit findings and implement those plans. Auditors will perform a review in the next audit year to ensure CAPs were implemented and non-compliance is resolved. Policies and procedures. Policies and standard operating procedures, or SOPs. An auditor or monitor could issue findings related to a recipient or subrecipient's policies and SOPs if the entity or program lacks policies and standard operating procedures that are required by the 2 CFR 200 or the federal awarding agency. A policy or standard operating procedure is not aligned with federal regulations. Internal controls have not yet been built into the policy or standard operating procedures. Staff have not adhered to the policy or standard operating procedures. To avoid findings related to policies and standard operating procedures, your agency or organization should research all policy requirements associated with your grant. You'll find these requirements in the 2 CFR 200, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the award letter, and the federal agency's regulations. Develop all required policies and standard operating procedures and ensure they meet the federal requirements. Develop any additional policies and standard operating procedures that will help your agency or organization operate the program and remain compliant. To avoid findings related to your policies and standard operating procedures, your agency or organization should include internal controls in all policies and standard operating procedures. Make sure policies and standard operating procedures stay current. Review at least annually. Update when a policy or process changes. Ensure that staff have easy access to the current version of policies and standard operating procedures. Provide training to staff when policies and standard operating procedures change. All right, that concludes today's Lunch and Learn. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your compliance specialist, Dexter, or me. And if we can't come up with an answer, we'll be sure to tap our expert, Susan Durham, for a little bit of help. But thank you all for coming today.
Hey, Lucy, before you go, Christina had a question. She raised her hand.
Okay.
Are you still here, Christina?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Susan. I just wondered if you could clarify the term expending in a year. Like, is that meaning that the money has actually been paid? Does it mean that it's an obligation question? I'm trying to determine.
Christina, it means you've truly spent the money, that you can see that 750,000 or more on your income statement as expenses. The obligating the funds does not trigger the audit threshold, nothing but the expenses.
Okay, that's great news. Thank you.
Yeah. And And since there aren't a lot of questions, I can follow up and say that single audit costs are an eligible cost. You have to charge the grant only that proportion of the single audit costs that benefit the any particular award. But if you only have one federal award, you could charge 100% of your single audit to it if that were in your budget. And they're very expensive, and I suggest that people consider putting them in their budget.
Susan, would that apply to just a normal audit that a nonprofit might do? Or is it a different type of audit specific to a federal grant?
It's a specific audit called the single audit. And I'm trying to think of a way in which your financial audit, annual financial audit could be charged. And I'm not really thinking of one. There are, if you have a grant that allows for administrative cost, a federal grant that allows for administrative cost, you could charge the portion of your external auditing cost to your federal grant, to your federal grant if you didn't qualify for a single audit. But it would be very difficult. I mean, most organizations have lots and lots and lots of financial uses. And, to determine that 1/60th of the audit should be charged to the federal grant might be difficult to calculate. But if your grant includes administrative costs, you could theoretically do that.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Gerald raised his hand, and then Greer, if we want to go in that order.
I am not sure if this was addressed, but how do we get notified of crossing the threshold, or is that something that we're supposed to monitor as individual administrators or project managers?
So Jerry, all of Louisville Metro government is covered under one single audit, and OMB manages it. We have one every year because we expend anywhere between $70 and $200 million in federal funds.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
My question's related to micro purchases. Over the years, I've heard some bizarre interpretations of the statement that procurement by micro purchase is the acquisition of supplies or services, the aggregate dollar amount of which does not exceed the micro purchase threshold. Could you talk more just about aggregate and what you're aggregating or what you're looking at to aggregate it?
I can address it, but I will tell you, I am not a purchasing specialist, so I can only address it from what I know. If there are like items, and I'm going to give a couple of examples. Let's say you buy a bunch of hammers and they're ball peen hammers, and then you just buy a bunch more hammers and they're a different type of hammer. I only know one kind of hammer, so I can't give you another kind of hammer as an example. Those are like items. If you were going to run credit reports and you ran credit reports from one company, and then you ran a little different credit report from a different company, those are still like items or services, and they would need to be aggregated together.
David, over what period of time?
It's always your fiscal year.
Okay.
So if you have a multi-year grant, you start fresh every fiscal year.
Maybe a relevant example for a lot of us is like if we're doing client assistance, such as with furniture, one case manager is going to order just the required items for that one client at that one time. That case manager has no knowledge and can't predict what other clients on other caseloads might need. And it's not like they're not purchasing the same set of furniture for every client because every client's needs are different. How would you go about aggregating that?
So first, I would look on sam.gov and see if the see which parts of the 2 CFR 200 apply to that grant. And you might know from other things, but to me, sam.gov is the very best, fastest way to find out if the whole 2 CFR 200 applies to your grants. And since we have time, if we get finished with questions, I can go in and show you what I mean. It's my #1 go-to. So if you know for sure all of the requirements for procurement apply to your grant, then you are going to have to consider those purchases in the aggregate. What I don't have the expertise in is whether it makes a difference if you buy a chair versus a couch. I just don't know that. We can send a question to our purchasing department and share their answer.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Christina, I believe you're next.
Yeah, this was just a small follow-up on the single audit question and charging the amount of that to a particular grant. So just to be clear, as you're trying to determine a percentage, so let's say an organization, making up numbers here, receives $1 million in, well, we get up to $1 million, 900,000 in one award, 50,000 in another award, 50,000 in another award. So then you would be, and that's your total amount of federal money coming from all sources. Then 90% of that could be charged to the grant. That's 900,000, 5% to the other, 5% to the other. Is that the way? Is that the right?
I believe that's the correct way to allocate it, but if you'll give me a chance to go back to the regulations and just verify that, and I can send you an email.
Okay, thanks, Susan.
If nobody else has any questions, I did pull up sam.gov. This is a grant called the Community Services Block Grant. And actually, let me go back. So this is sam.gov. If you don't have a registration on sam.gov, you can register fully and do business directly with the federal government, or you can just get a number from sam.gov, which is called the Unique Entity ID number. Now, Metro Government, those of you who are here with Metro Government, we've got one. We don't need another one. But if any of you all don't, you can get that number from sam.gov. But you can also search various things on sam.gov. Those of you who are passing through federal funds can look up your subrecipients to make sure that they're in good standing. Those of you who have contracts should go on sam.gov to make sure your contractors are not debarred or suspended from receiving federal funds. But you can also look up any federal grant program. And there's a lot of information on here. Tells you what law authorized the funding. We're going to skip through most of this though. And if you go down to compliance requirements, it will tell you which parts of the 2 CFR 200 apply to this grant. So in this one, it's subpart B, C, D, E, and F. But sometimes it'll say subpart E doesn't apply. And then down here, there might be other information. I didn't choose a good one for this. Let me choose ARP because they've got something interesting. So if we go down to the compliance requirements, it says all of the sections apply, but when you read down here, it says but wait, these specific provisions don't apply. And let me zoom in. So it talks about 200.204, 210, parts of 200.305 don't apply. And I can't tell you how how helpful this information in SAM.gov has been throughout my career in compliance. And I wasn't going to do this today, and I know a lot of people left, but I have left working. You're welcome, Valerie. I've left working the Office of Management and Budget. I'm no longer working on the American Rescue Plan team. I'm now working at Mayor Greenberg's office, and I'm hoping, well, my new position is Senior Advisor for Grants and Community Partnerships, and I'm hoping to bring a new training series to everybody soon that's going to focus more on front end processes like getting grants ready, writing grants, finding funding, creating partnerships. We're going to try to provide a lot of resources to Metro agency staff and then also to our community partners. And I'm really very excited about bringing you all that content and working with you all in other capacities. Thank you, Jane.
So, wonderful. Great news.
And we're going to put, Patrick just mentioned it, we're going to have all the Lunch and Learn content on the grantee resources page so you all can watch these videos over and over and over again. Thank you, Tom.
All right, thanks everyone.